Hello, BookTube. Well, in an object lesson for the perils of letting a diva do the driving, for our two-person book club, I recently let Matthew at Mayberry Book Club pick the graphic novel that we would read next. And he picked the least comprehensible graphic novel for a newcomer, which is what he is to the world of comics, imaginable. I guess he could have picked a worse one if he'd picked something that was printed in Japanese or something, but this one's printed in English, and that's about as far as you can go. He picked Avengers Forever, which is, on one level, one of the greatest Avengers storylines ever done. It's written by Kurt Busiek. It's got unbelievable artwork by Carlos Pacheco. I did not show you enough of that artwork last time. I will correct that this time around. And it is the ultimate love letter to a long-time dyed-in-the-wool Avengers fans, people who've been following the continuity from the beginning in every one of its little details and wondering how this detail impinges on that detail. And this is a 12-issue miniseries, so we're reading 3 issues a week, trying to grope our way through it. And we have added Michael K. Vaughan to maybe see what the different levels of grasping this are all about. Now, I gave you a long, detailed backstory of the basics of what's going on here last time. I want to concentrate just a bit more on the actual proper plot this time around. The backstory, to summarize, is that this is the ultimate Avengers time travel story, where a couple of characters using rare energy that they don't usually have access to snatch a handful of Avengers from different time periods in the team's history in order to use them to fight a temporal menace that could wipe out their timelines and everybody else's. Now, when you think Avengers and you think time travel, the first person you're going to think of, if you know the team at all, is Kang the Conqueror, a great Avengers villain who may have a more prominent role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You'll have to let me know that going forward, because I don't intend to watch. He's a great fan favorite of a Marvel superhero, an Avengers villain. He's traveled from the far future to fight the Avengers. And he always loses. They always find a way to beat him. But there's another secondary character in Avengers lore that you also might think of when you think of time travel, and that is a character named Immortus. Do I have pictures of them on this edition? No, I don't. You might think, well, Immortus is the master of time. But Immortus is also Kang. Kang grows over the centuries to be Immortus. Only in one of the many narrative genius strokes in this book, Kurt Busiek, the writer, decides that is not pleasing to Kang the Conqueror. Kang says there, right there in his name, is a man of action, not of deliberation. He's not a judge. He's not quietly overseeing things from a citadel at the end of time. He wants to take what is his. That's why he loves fighting the Avengers. That's why he loves fighting, period. One of the antagonisms that erupts in this storyline is between two people who are the same person, Kang and Immortus. But there's another antagonism that's brewing, and it also is going to erupt in the 3 issues that we're reading today. And it involves the fact that 2 of the characters from the Avengers timelines that are plucked at different periods in the team are Yellow Jacket and Giant Man. And the antagonism between them is because they're the same person. Hank Pym, Giant Man, has had in the course of the character's career various psychological breakdowns, and during one of those breakdowns, he takes on the alternate costume persona of Yellow Jacket, and doesn't remember that he was Giant Man, and is only shocked out of that in a famous issue where he's shocked out of this extremely self-defining trauma and takes about a minute to shake it off, and then engages in marriage to Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp. Which is, there she is. You'd think you'd want to take a week, but no. So Giant Man and the Wasp, from this group of Avengers, you see our group, but you also see lots of other Avengers on this cover. They are from, roughly speaking, what we would now call the Avengers present. So Giant Man remembers that he was Yellow Jacket. Yellow Jacket has no idea that he's going to be Giant Man. It's unclear whether or not Giant Man, or whether or not Yellow Jacket even remembers that he was Ant-Man. So he doesn't know that Giant Man is himself. So we have Giant Man and the Wasp are from the present day of the Avengers. Yellow Jacket is from the past. Captain America is also from the past, from a disillusioned period in his history, a period that will, from the issues of his run coming out during Watergate, when he was disillusioned, but he also had super strength, which the ordinary Captain America, despite what you might think from the movies, doesn't have. And there was also Hawkeye from a period in his career when he wasn't wearing his normal costume. He didn't have a quiver full of gimmick arrows. And two future Avengers, Songbird and Janice Marvel, are from the future of the team. So they're unknown quantities to everybody, except that the members of the team, including Rick Jones, who I don't think is on this cover. I picked the wrong cover. The Avengers sidekick, Rick Jones, is a key player in this book. I have no idea why. I have no idea why. If Kurt Busiek wanted to make a long-standing mark on Avengers continuity, he could have been the writer to finally get permission to kill Rick Jones. That would be great. But he doesn't. Instead, Rick Jones is a sort of a teenage sidekick for the team. And he and Giant Man and Wasp do remember Janice Marvel, but they didn't. He was sort of a twerp. They didn't like him. And they remember Songbird when she was a villain. She reforms. By the time we get to the time period that she's drawn from, she's a hero. That core group of Avengers is set to aid Kang the Conqueror in preventing Immortus from killing Rick Jones, who is key to all of the timelines, all of the various timelines. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, imagine how Matthew feels right now. All of Avengers history is pulled in. We got a big, strong taste of that in the first 3 issues. We get even more of it in these next 3 issues, which are encapsulated and do comprise MacGuffin hunts. Odd, aberrant timelines that have cropped up and need to be examined and dealt with. And in order to do that, Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, who is leading this ragtag group of time-tossed Avengers, splits the group into smaller teams, 2- and 3-person teams, to go to each of these crucial time zones and look around. And that is these 3 issues. That is their adventures in these 3 issues. Are you going to the 1950s to a proto-Avengers team that never really existed, full of 1950s superhero characters like Gorilla Man or the 3-Dimensional Man or whatever, or Venus, the character Venus, who was very popular in the 1950s. But who is she? What is she? You have a group of characters going there. You have groups of characters going to these separate locations, and one of those locations here. Let me get you the great visual. One of those locations is the Old West, and immediately when readers of this series saw that, they recognized the time frame and the setting, because there was a great little run on the Avengers. Look at this panel. Jehoshaphat. It's the Old West, but there's a giant dinosaur on Main Street. And the reason for it is because this here. Let me show you where this came from. In a formative period for Kurt Busiek's own comic book reading, I should say. It isn't pulling it out of the blue. He's revisiting his own best hits. Everybody remembers this issue of the Avengers because of how great it was. This is Avengers 142. I paid that sterling 25 cents. There is a great Gil Kane cover. It's great, but it's inaccurate because Iron Man and Moondragon are not in this part. The Avengers in this story 50 years ago, once again, split into smaller teams. It's just Thor and Moondragon who are in this. And this is great Gil Kane artwork. I don't know if you can tell, but John Romita Sr. had his hand in touching up some of the faces. He just did that routinely, even with the artwork of someone like Gil Kane. And here you have the Avengers facing what longtime Marvel fans will recognize as some of the great Marvel Western heroes. Rawhide Kid, Two Gun Kid, the original Ghost Rider. It's a great storyline. I've shown it to you before in detail. We've gone through it panel by panel on this channel, where Thor and Moondragon are in the Old West, and they realize that their enemy is Kang the Conqueror, who has decided if the Avengers are constantly preventing him from conquering the 20th century, then he'll conquer the 19th century, and thereby do an end run on that. He has set up a citadel in an Old West town, and he has mutated a jackal into a monster, a coyote into a monster, and he has what seems like a powerless group aside from Thor to face him. You have the two-gun kid. You have Hawkeye only with very few trick arrows, almost nothing in the way of trick arrows. You have Moon Knight, or Moondragon, she's been trained in in-depth telepathic powers, but she's still just human, although she fashions herself a goddess. And then you have Thor. And it's a great bit. The rest of the Avengers are having a modern-day adventure, so every issue was split. It's great artwork by George Perez. And at one point, at the climax of the Old West part of that storyline, our heroes invade Kang's fortress, and unbeknownst to Kang, Thor has slammed his hammer down on the ground and reverted to his mortal identity of Dr. Donald Blake, and put on a mustache, just for good measure. So Kang doesn't see Thor enter his citadel, and his mutated monster easily handles the other people. It's 20 feet tall. It's no big deal at all. But when Kang is watching the battle from his control room, and he's feeling pretty confident, not only because the team is so underpowered, but because in this part of his storyline, he has an impenetrable force field around him. So he doesn't have to worry about anyone, sneaking up on him or anything like that. And someone is sneaking up on him, because he pans all around his little chamber of death, and he says, "The bearded stranger doesn't appear to be anywhere." And there's a gaping hole in the wall, and he turns around, and Thor is there in his control room and says, you were tricked. And the next panel that we get is Kang being blasted out of his citadel, just 200 feet in the air. And when he lands on the ground, he's not hurt because he's in his force field, but the force field doesn't anchor him to the ground. If something hits him really hard, he's going to move inside his force field. The whole thing is going to move together. He hits the ground, and Thor lands on the ground right at the same time and says something very in character for Thor when he's written correctly. He puts his hammer in his belt, just has his hands, and says, "I've had enough of you. You and me, under this bright sky, are going to have this out once and for all. I don't need the Avengers. I don't need any kind of technology. We're going to fight this out together, and you're not going anywhere until it's done." And Kang uses his molecular dissolution beam. It has no effect on Thor. Thor just keeps pounding on that force field. And of course, it's impenetrable, but it is a technological device. There's only so much power that it can draw. And Thor is quickly overloading that, but Kang won't give up. He won't admit defeat, and seems to die. His shield generator, his belt shield generator, seems to overload, and it dissipates him, just rips him apart. And we never really know what that means. We have already learned from this point that Kang and Immortus are connected. Kang and Immortus and Doctor Doom are connected. Kang and Immortus and Doctor Doom and Rama-Tut are connected. Kang and Immortus and Doctor Doom and Rama-Tut and the Red Centurion are all connected. We don't really know what effect that's going to have. I remember reading that issue. I thought it was a great Thor moment. It had been leading up. The comics had been leading up to that moment. Kang had slipped away from Thor a couple of times. So to have that moment just baldly out there in the open, no equivocation, no last-minute surprises, just that. I love the moment. I had two questions about it. One was, why doesn't Thor do this with every Avenger villain? There's no one who would have a better outcome than Kang if he did that. Why does he even bother with, whether or not Captain America's shield is going to bounce off something? But also, I wondered, is this the last we've seen of Kang? And of course it wasn't. You see, Kang is all over these issues. But that was an explicit callback by Kurt Busiek to that moment. And one team goes to the future, one team goes to the past, and while all of that is happening, the narrative, two teams go to the past, one to the 1950s, one to the ancient West. But when all of those MacGuffins are done, all of our heroes come back together. They all come back to where they started. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the MacGuffin issues aren't interesting. They're terrific. Look at how beautiful this artwork is. Just look at that, how beautiful it is, how graceful it is. That is of an older and wiser Black Panther in one of the future storylines. But they come back to where they were, to where they started out originally, and Giant Man decides that their correct approach is to take on Immortus himself directly. No more of these MacGuffin hunts in previous time streams. Instead, we're going to confront him directly. And every single moment of these issues is a visual callback to something that a longtime Avengers fan will know. There's Thor and his small group. Thor is carrying a staff that is narrating the history of the Kree and the Skrull and a race of living trees. There's Kang's Escher-esque headquarters. Thor fans will know that. They will recognize that moment. In these headquarters, time warps all around. And many things are revealed. And the most important revelation is to Yellowjacket, who, keep in mind, betrayed the team when he first showed up. He has it revealed to him that he is going to become Giant Man. That he's going to become, what does he call it? I guess what they've been saying all along is true. Yellowjacket is Hank Pym. But if that's true, then I snap out of this, turn into that oversized sap, and all I've got to look forward to is a future of misery and failure. That just ain't going to happen. He decides, since he knows that is the straw that broke the camel's back, he will ally himself with Immortus. He will betray the team yet again. Yellowjacket is always bad. But look at some of this artwork. It's just incredible. Look at that. Look at the confidence of doing that. No backgrounds, no fuss, just that beautiful artwork. It's just amazing. And also, I might point out, you see this for drama, but this also for action. Pacheco knows that he only has so much that he can do with the real estate. He manages to do quite a bit in longitudinal portraits instead of just gigantic big splash pages. He does it again here with Hawkeye fighting Tempest. Of course, you can't keep a good time monster down. And that is where this whole chunk that we're reading today ends. It ends with Yellowjacket agreeing to help destroy the Avengers. Again, I want to point out how beautiful this artwork is, how amazingly graceful it is, you see Immortus, that's Immortus there, you see him pacing. You don't need to be told that he's pacing, or God forbid, see motion lines. You can see the brooding nature of their conversation. It's just delightful. I mean, Busiek's writing is great too, but that was our middle chunk here. And this will be the easiest chunk for instance, Matthew, because this chunk is separate, bottled MacGuffin adventures that don't rely too heavily on continuity. Not much. You'll meet Thundra. Does Matthew know who Thundra is? No. Does he need to? No. He'll meet the Black Panther, but thanks to a billion-dollar movie, he does know who Black Panther is. You will get reprised scenes from that great old Avengers comic. Did Matthew read that? Did he pay money for it at the dry goods store? No, he did not. But it's reprised just enough so that those self-contained little adventures are very satisfying. Not only because Busiek does a really good job of keeping things to a minimum in terms of exposition overload, but also because he decreases the cast, right? Each one of those little MacGuffin adventures features just a couple of characters, so it's fewer people you have to keep track of. But the wrench that he throws in Avengers continuity just writ large in those 3 issues is a creature called the Space Phantom, who we meet in a very, very early issue of the Avengers, and he's a creature where he can take on your form so that no one can tell you apart. And when he does that, you get shunted off into his realm in limbo until the switch is counteracted. And then he goes back and you become yourself again. We've mentioned the Space Phantom on this channel once when it came to the Avengers, because during the initial appearance of the Space Phantom, he takes the place of the Hulk, and the Avengers reveal how little they trust the Hulk, who was on the team at the time. And somehow or other, when they switch places again, the Hulk knows that. And that's why he leaves the Avengers, because that adventure with the Space Phantom has revealed to him that these teammates of his don't trust him. In these issues, it is revealed that there are many Space Phantoms, that they're in fact a whole race of people who can do this. They can all do this. Think about that for a minute. If the writer introduces the ability to have any part of the continuity he doesn't like be Space Phantoms mimicking Iron Man or Giant Man or whoever, that opens up a lot of possibilities. It opens up a lot of possibilities for rewriting the history of the Avengers. And in our next 3 issues, that is exactly what Kurt Busiek proceeds to do. The secret history of the Avengers. So not only is it a love letter of continuity lovers, but it's also going to screw with them a bit, as we will see next week, when suddenly the event... Bean, I'm trying to make a video, baby. Oh, God help us. When next week, the continuity wonkishness takes off again. We had a brief break from it when we were going to the 1950s or the 1850s, but that's all over with now. Now there are no more MacGuffin plots. Instead, we are right back to the main plot of Kang and Immortus. So we will deal with that in the next 3 issues, which is going to get mind-bogglingly complicated for newcomers, but also has the greatest issue in this entire book. So there'll be that. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.